Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar, Smoke and Mirrors, Why Customer Experience Programs Miss Their Mark. I'm very excited to be joined by our panelists, Faith Adams and David Roberts. Faith is an analyst at Forrester Research, focused on areas of customer experience, including CX measurement and customer-centric culture. David is CEO at Alchemer and has been focused on customer relations throughout his entire career, since he was a founding member of Accenture's customer relationship management practice. The voice of the customer is vital to how every organization functions. However, many companies simply aren't acting appropriately on what their customers tell them. There are many reasons for this gap between feedback and action. Alchemer recently commissioned Forrester Research to dig into this critical topic. The research report is very compelling and uncovers many ways for organizations to strengthen their VOC programs. We will make the research report available to all of our webinar attendees. Faith and David bring such depth of knowledge regarding customer experience and voice of the customer. I know I'm very excited to hear their insights. Let's get started. Faith, let's get started with an overview of the research program that Forrester Consulting put together on behalf of Alchemer.
Absolutely. First off, thank you guys for having me. So Alchemer commissioned Forrester's consulting team to evaluate customer experience and voice of customer insights and data use. There was over 300 respondents, all of which had some level of decision-making authority that were involved in this study. And what we had actually seen was that the voice of the customer is critical to how all of these organizations function. However, yet many of these organizations are simply not acting on their programs in a very meaningful way, which we also know does not help transform customer experience. And candidly, this is very consistent with what we continue to see and hear from Forrester customers and the market on a day-to-day basis. There's lots of investments in these programs. It's really hard, though, to drive action. Organizations are doing a great job of listening to their customer. They're hearing what they're telling them, but they just lack the appropriate processes and execution capabilities that help them act on the feedback that they receive and do so in a very meaningful and consistent way. Organizations continue to fall victim to process inefficiencies. They're deprioritizing initiatives, and there's a lack of automation that really continues to hinder that ongoing action. There's an altered sense of reality that seems to undermine the progress. I have to say this was probably one of the biggest, I guess, surprises to me, because not everybody seems to think that their program is that great, but many of these respondents seem to have an inflated perception of their program, but many of their other answers indicated they were not as mature as they had thought. Many organizations simply believe that because they are collecting feedback, that their VOC program is effective, which is heartbreaking, because we know that's not the case. Collecting feedback is just one tiny piece of it. And again, it goes back to their answers not really indicating that efficacy and that maturity that VOC programs should be focused on. This is because even though they are collecting feedback and generating some level of insights, I say some level of insights because insights are not always meaningful and relevant based on who the internal stakeholder they might be supporting is. So they're not really working these insights into business decisions in a meaningful way, and therefore they're not really seeing the benefits, which are absolutely crucial to maintaining momentum and propelling these programs forward. So I know I painted a grim picture there, but it's very accurate based on what the data said.
That's really interesting. I'm excited to start digging in. David, I'd love to hear your perspective on those key questions that you really hope to get answered through the research.
Well, yeah, and thank you so much to Faith and to Forrester for all the work they put into this research. We commissioned it for a few different reasons. One, this space continues to be challenging, and Faith will talk a lot about that through the course of the time we spend together. But whether you call it CFM or CX or VOC or EFM, at the end of the day, our customers are really trying to find a way to engage their customers in how they run their organizations. And especially over the last year, organizations are feeling more distant from the customer. They're feeling more distant from the employee. And we really wanted to focus on how many people out in the industry are really able to put all their, as Faith said, customers are doing a great job listening. how many of them are really able to put that to work and make the customer or the employee feel like they're responding to what those people say. The other interesting thing is I think there's a parallel. For those of you who've been in marketing for a long time, there's an old famous marketing quote, which is, I know that half the money I spent on advertising is wasted. I just don't know which half it is. And it's been a long time since that quote came out. And I think if you look at how marketing organizations are able now to really quantify their marketing spend, understand exactly where that spend is going, what it's delivering. I know here at Alchemer, our marketing team is relentless about looking at the cost per lead and what those leads drive and what our conversion rates are and how we do in generating brand awareness and aided and unaided brand recognition. There's so much now in marketing that's very, very data driven. I think CX or VOC is now at that same place where people feel like it's really important to engage the customer and to listen to them and respond to them, but they don't know what it's really driving for them and they aren't able to quantify or measure the impact it's having on their organizations. So that's really the focus of the research we set out to do together.
Very interesting. All right, why don't we start with, tell me, Faith, about those initial findings that you really uncovered with the research.
Yeah, I think that the biggest finding is that your CX program actually probably deserves more effort than it's really being given. One of the things that we see oftentimes is that teams can be very small. They can be very disconnected from the rest of the organization. And so these CX programs continue to fail, which based on this research was evident in 3 key areas. There was the quality aspect of the program, there was the embeddedness, how embedded it actually got into the organization, and then the formal process piece. And so in order to be successful, you absolutely have to integrate and formalize processes now to be able to ensure your future success. And I think without it, it continues to be this free for all. And that is what we consistently see today, is that it's almost every man or every department for himself. And without that rigor, without that process, without that formality and that coordination behind it. And so there tends to be this big free for all. And so you have to focus on that quality, embeddedness, and process. And if you can do that, I think you're going to be setting yourselves up for success.
That's great. Let's start digging into the first one. That initial finding that customer experience programs are often not set up for success. Everyone from small and medium businesses to enterprise organizations, they all indicate that they have a CX and VOC program. Faith, can you share more about that initial finding?
Yes, and part of this is the former practitioner in me. I'm going to do my best not to get too excited and derail. Sometimes I get a little passionate when talking about this in particular. We all know customer experience is critical. It's how customers perceive their interactions with your company. It influences customer engagement, satisfaction, decision making, and more. And, I think about me as a customer and the former practitioner. I've broken up with brands largely because of the fact that they simply never got CX right. They never tried, or they would collect my feedback and then not act on it. I have a couple good stories for that, but I will refrain from sharing them today. Otherwise, I will consume the next 51 minutes. But for companies, CX, it's kind of just perceived as this nice to have or a check the box effort rather than the must have that it absolutely needs to be. It's not often seen as a series of competencies that we talk a lot about at Forrester. It goes beyond just measuring CX. It's about, enabling and empowering your employees. It's about prioritizing the right things to do, using feedback and information and data to create, a more formal and better design process. The list goes on. It all contributes to that customer-centric culture as well. But now more than ever, especially given the situation that we've been in for the past year plus, customers, they want their voice to be heard. They expect more. Customers were already demanding, but those wants, needs, and behaviors, they really need to be considered when you're thinking about, what you do as a business and how you present yourself to the customer. I often bring up this too. There's often this perception that customer experience is a little fluffy. And even, some CX leaders, they can't necessarily articulate that CX can actually play a leading role in driving your strategy, not only because it will improve things for the customer, but also because it can drive business outcomes, or deliver, or contribute to a customer-centric culture, make your customers more customer-centric. So there is this huge benefit to CX beyond improving CX. It drives business outcomes as well. So there's a couple of key foundational issues that are in play here. And these are quite consistent with what we see in here on a daily basis. When I'm studying what companies are doing, what is and isn't working, there continues to be a lack of a clear strategy, or sometimes going back to that free-for-all comment that we made earlier, inconsistent strategies across different parts of the organization. There's that lack of consistency that we've referred to. There's a failure to define CX as the value driver that it really is. How to share those success stories. Where are you doing things well? Who are those employees that are demonstrating customer-centric behaviors? Find ways to share, what's going well, like how is the company excelling? Proving the ROI of some of the initiatives that have taken place, showing those business outcomes, and not only showing the benefit to the customer, but really focusing in on what it meant to the business. Different stakeholders are going to, be enabled in different ways. Some people, they might be more financially driven, what's in it for the company. Some people might be more driven by what's in it for the customer. So really making sure that you're able to think about how other folks will define CX success is crucial, in being able to help that value perception increase. And then there's the inability to respond to customer problems. This one kind of breaks my heart, because one of the big reasons I hear all the time is we're making these investments because we want to be able to close that loop with a customer. Well, many companies are still not closing that loop with a customer, and many struggle to actually prioritize across the organization too. So there's this continued putting CX at risk by not even showing your customers that their feedback does indeed matter. So you have to be able to respond to those customer problems, whether it be one-to-one or by actually driving those improvements that you're leveraging that feedback and data to do. So a strong, effective, sustainable program is going to be one that gets embedded into the organization, that becomes a way of life for your people, no matter where they're sitting. It's prioritized based on and built into your organizational strategy. It's methodical, it's strategic, it's planned, and it's tactically executed. I often have conversations with shoppers of technologies and teams that are running these programs, and there's a strategy aspect and a tactical aspect, and you absolutely have to have both. So now here I come with the negative Nelly sort of comments again. The findings of this really showed that many of these programs, they're in a state of dire straits. CX is not always, the key priority that it should be. It's often being abandoned as a critical priority. It's the first thing to go when business might be in peril. So, there was an impact of COVID in the past year. 91% said they were impacted by COVID. 46% abandoned their priorities. That's kind of a big deal when you're making that pivot or shift, right? 36% reallocated or suspended their budgets. That's also game changing. If you're actually not able to make an investment in something that you had planned in the next quarter or the next year, that's going to have to shift your program and your effort. Many have paused their workflows. Those strategies continue to pivot, and nearly a quarter, actually over a quarter, had said there was an inability to gather insights or work effectively. That's actually concerning. So nearly 1 in 4 employees, said there was an inability to gather insights and work effectively. Well, how do you become an insights-driven business then? So organizations simply are not focusing on many of the most crucial business beneficial initiatives. There's heavy investments in some programs that are still failing to deliver. There's tends to be, I think a lot of organizations that want to focus on the right things, but yet they're leaving money on the table by doing the wrong things, which was something that was evident in the data as well. Some organizations neglect focus on cost reduction and ROI improvements. That needs to be embedded. I think one of my boss actually had, it was an old blog post that said, the #1 metric you need to be reporting isn't NPS, it's pretty much dollars and cents. So help people see the value in customer experience, help it become a way of life for your organization. Low maturity operations, including siloed workflows. This is one that actually really gets me going as well. There's a lot of things that are table stakes, but yet they're really not providing, any advantages or true benefits in some cases, because the lack of maturity is continuing. It's not moving to that next level of advanced or what I would call to be state of the art. There's just typical collection of the insights, things being maybe shared. I often joke that they end up going into a drawer. So you're collecting the information, you're collecting the feedback, maybe some analysis is taking place, but where does it go from there? Is it meaningful and relevant to the audience? Is it becoming embedded into their day-to-day? Is there a regular cadence behind sharing? The answer to all of these questions is pretty much no. There's also a lot of legacy technologies and data that are still heavily relied upon. Sometimes getting the right insights and data from those technologies doesn't necessarily make it easy to become embedded into the organization. So I guess this is my way of saying, I love that there's so much passion and investment going into this space, but there is so much opportunity around the improvement side of it. There's so much to be done. It's about moving from being all talk and saying you have this program and collecting the feedback to really focusing on that action component. That was clear to me in the data, that there needs to be more of this emphasis on getting embedded, embedding CX into the organization, and really just taking things to that next level, moving from data and insights to action. So I think organizations must really start to evaluate their strategy, evaluate their program, and plan their course, chart their next steps for improvement. And if that can be done, that's a huge step in the right direction.
That's great feedback. David is the CEO of an organization that provides a voice of the customer platform. Do you see these same disparities between customer experience goals and the actual programs and results? Did these results surprise you?
Yeah, I do see the same things that Faith is talking about. In fact, one of the reasons we like talking to Faith is she's been a practitioner, she's pragmatic, she's data-driven. She joked about CX being fluffy. I think Faith even had a joke about marshmallows at one point. But people used to call marketing fluffy 15, 20 years ago, and they don't anymore. And I think we need to get to that same place with CX. I think CX, there's a question that came up, and we'll get to Q&A, but people still think about CX basically as just software and data analytics. They don't think about peoples and role definitions and process design and things that you would never go implement software without defining those things for many software packages that you implement at your organization. And yet with CX, somebody starts by saying something simple like, oh, did anyone ask the customer? And someone says, oh, I'll go do some research. And they gather some data and they put some pie charts together. And as human beings, whenever we have vast amounts of data, we naturally categorize. And we categorize data so we can understand it, because we can't keep all the data points clear in our brain. So we put things in categories. And when we categorize, we lose fidelity, and we actually lose the voice of the customer. The way you get back to each customer is by addressing each customer. And the analysis helps you build a system of VOC and not just build a dashboard. You're actually thinking about how you're routing customer information or customer feedback into the various functions that respond to that customer using the systems they use every day. So we believe at Alchemer that we're more like the nervous system than the big brain. A lot of our competitors talk about pulling data all into one location and trying to provide one comprehensive set of dashboards. We can do a lot of that reporting, but we think the value is more, rather than being that big brain, and being the nervous system that connects the customer feedback out to the fingers and toes and the knees and all the parts of the organization that actually engages in the customer. The thing I was most surprised about in the research is something Faith mentioned. 91% have been heavily impacted by COVID, and their response was to reduce their budgets. So if you've been in marketing, and I'll keep using this analogy, whenever there were tough times, somebody comes along and asks marketing to cut their budgets. And the reason they do it is because they don't understand the value marketing is delivering. And that's for sure 10 times as much today with CX. Those budgets are cut first because people don't understand the value. They can't connect the dot from what the customer is telling you to how the organization responds to how it affects the bottom line. And as a CEO and as a practitioner myself for many, many years in the CRM space, growing up at Accenture and Anderson Consulting, people thought you plug in CRM software and everything's solved. And it never worked that way for CRM, and it definitely doesn't work that way for CX. You've got to really understand what you're trying to achieve, figure out what needles you're trying to move, and orchestrate and wire it or embed it, as Faith talks about, in your organization so you can see the results of your investment.
That's great. The research found that CX programs really fail in those three key areas: quality, embeddedness, and process. Specifically, Faith, you said that organizations are disconnected among key people, processes, and technology pillars and are not able to back up their perception of excellence with actions. Can you give us a little bit more detail on this finding?
Absolutely. So a great place to start is to really just start to look at the difference between your data collection, approaches and the whole driving action component. VOC programs complete a cycle of 4 key activities: listen to the voice of the customer, interpret and analyze the data, close that customer feedback loop, prioritize effectively, take some actions, and then socialize and show the value, whether it be an improvement on the metrics, customer success stories, or that ROI and outcomes piece. And when you look at, a lot of the data that came out of this study, it's, it just seems like there's just so many gaps. There's this, I always say, people, process, data, then technology. And, in that order, because you have to be able to get people on board. You have to help them understand and see the value. You have to look at the current processes that are in place and sometimes design around things that, are sometimes, maybe not optimal. I know a lot of organizations will have the excuse, well, we're not closing the loop because we could never do so in a timely fashion. And at that point, it doesn't really matter. Well, have you looked at the processes and workflows that your customer service agents are going through? But, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We talk about the communication plan and some other things, but, 25% of companies had said that they effectively address customer feedback. Okay. If only 25% say they effectively address customer feedback, like that's a huge red flag. Because if you're collecting it and you're pretty much not addressing it, what kind of a message is that sending to the customer? 75% believe that their entire company clearly defines success for their customer program. But if 25% are saying that they're effectively addressing customer feedback, that small number, that kind of indicates that they're really not, the entire company isn't clearly defining success for the program. Many organizations, say that their program is not really understood. Just 24% say that it is. One of the foundational exercises that I suggest teams get started on, whether they're revamping or getting started with a program that kind of stagnated, or whether they're building a brand new program, is really embarking into the organization and help people connect the work that they do to the voice of the customer, understanding what's important to them, what type of data is going to be relevant and specific to helping them achieve their goals, and help them, achieve success from where they sit in the organization. I think it was a sad number, around 20% believe customer centricity, is part of their company culture. More than 20% need to believe that, especially if you are like an organization that is really trying to embrace CX as a critical differentiator. 1 in 5 employees isn't going to cut it. 19% said VOC is embedded into their business operations. That's not enough. It needs to be 100% embedded if you actually want to become an insights-driven business that puts the customer at the heart of what they do. Again, 1 in 5 is never going to be enough. Another critical issue is that, there's oftentimes low quality data that is often being used. Less can mean more in some cases. I think that a lot of organizations end up getting into, the good old analysis paralysis. They're collecting tons of data, but because they're collecting so much and they're resource constrained, they can't really do anything with the data. So that you have to be able to do an evaluation of, what are those critical inputs? What data is actually used to inform decision making? So those top-notch data strategies, they actually require, high quality, relevant, consistent, and meaningful data. I often talk about making it all ears for your audience: easy, appealing, relevant, and specific. It's easy to remember that. However, again, going back to the whole point of these programs not being embedded, when you aren't delivering the right data to the right people, and it's not hitting the mark and delivering them value, of course it's not going to become embedded. So again, going back to that people piece, get to know your people. Automation is something else that's important too. But yet we looked at, when we looked at the data, only 11% and 6% have fully automated analysis and communications process for these different stages. And so again, there's some gaps there. You can automate, but you need to make sure that the information and the communications that are being delivered to key stakeholders, again, goes back to that relevance factor. The research also showed that feedback simply is really not, even close to getting embedded. 22% of enterprise respondents reported that the CX model is quote unquote enterprise-wide. However, I think even for many organizations that will say that it's enterprise-wide, you're still going to find a lot of rogue activities. And so sometimes when those rogue activities are taking place, the goal should be to understand why. Why is it happening? Is there a better way to achieve a higher level of coordination here? I think even when organizations are progressing in a more, healthy and efficient way, the ability to prioritize on data is critical. And the sum of all parts, many different data sources, many different teams coming together is crucial. That doesn't happen without communication, especially when there might be some rogue activities taking place, which is indicated by only 22% of programs actually being enterprise-wide in enterprise organizations. So I have to ask the question, and I would encourage everybody listening here today to take this from, what I'm about to say. Why are you collecting things if they're not being communicated to the rest of the organization and not being used to make those decisions? If you're able to do that, and if you think that it's not being used because it's not relevant, maybe you should rethink what's actually being shared. And this kind of ties to what we talk about being a little bit of the messy process piece, and the lack of key consistent metrics across the organization, which we also saw in the data. Organizations feel like they've spent a lot of time, money, and resources to build an effective strategy. However, they're not seeing the return because they can't interpret the results and they're not able to take action. That means that something isn't working. So these challenges continue to result in those negative or less than optimal business outcomes that I feel like I'm kind of beating a dead horse on today. So you have to be able to shift the mentality of, not seeing action, not seeing results, to focusing on driving action, getting embedded and seeing results. And, the fact that 96% had reported that they were seeing negative business outcomes as a result of their data challenges. They say if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, the definition of insanity is also repeating the same behaviors over and over again and expecting a different result. So if something isn't working in your program, and you're seeing negative business outcomes, I think it means it's time for a change. And that starts with taking that good hard look in the mirror and thinking about what can we do differently? How can we move from data and insights to action and embeddedness and those business outcomes? And these programs aren't built overnight. I like to set that expectation, but there's so much opportunity here if you just fix what's broken.
Those are such compelling metrics. That's amazing, 96%. David, can you share your thoughts and the Alchemer vision on the importance of delivering an integrated solution that provides that critical level of automation? Also, can you speak a little bit to the ways that automation feeds directly into improved processes and metrics?
Yeah, I think automation is key, and whether you call it workflow or actionable data, there's different ways to think about that. Our perspective is that you do automate and drive workflow off of what your customers are telling you, and that the data is not destined for dashboards. It's destined for the place where the person in the organization can actually solve the customer's problem. So I also think you can get such insight from people if they feel like they're engaging with the company as part of how it runs its business. I mean, I'll use a really simple example that's really relevant today. Like lots of organizations, we're hiring. lots and lots of people. There are many organizations around the world today that are struggling, but if you're in software, there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of engagement, and we need good talent. It's hard to assess talent over Zoom in the same sort of way. It's also hard if you've gone through and ever screened roles and read resumes. I mean, man, reading through resumes to try to get to the right people is very, very difficult. So you can extend your enterprise. You can extend your recruiting systems to engage applicants to understand what they care most about and the roles they're looking for and whether they're the right fit. You can gather feedback on how you're doing as an employer and establish that employer brand and recruiting people. You can figure out whether the benefits you provide are market relevant. And in the same exact process, you can actually figure out whether someone's right for the role by asking them really smart questions and collecting feedback on whether they're a fit for that right role. So a lot of these enterprise software packages, they'll say, well, we have a portal for that. And it's true, they all have portals for it. But the simplicity of engaging people through a typical survey or collection method where people can just answer a series of simple questions and provide you so much insight to how they think about things. It then frames within your own business process whether someone in this example is right for the role. And at the same time, you're learning about whether your benefits are market relevant. You're learning about whether your recruiter is engaging people in the right way, whether the hiring manager is framing the opportunity in the right way. You can learn so much about how you present yourself as an employer to people who are interested at the same time that you're engaging them in the process. People talk about NPS a lot. NPS is often destined for quarterly meetings and pie charts. And people nod and they think it's interesting, and then a quarter later, they look for the next update. That's not how our customers, it's not how we use NPS. We actually wire it into our marketing programs. We wire it into our renewal sales motions. We wire it into our customer support. If somebody gives us feedback in an NPS survey, it turns into a support ticket, and one of our support hero follows up and addresses the concern. We treat it like any other inquiry that might come into the organization. So wiring it into your processes, wiring it into the way you engage with your customer keeps you as an organization so much closer to your customer and so much more responsive to their needs. So it's such the right time for this, and employees and customers are both expecting organizations to really reach out as things open up and become way more engaged again.
That's really interesting. Customer experience and voice of the customer programs really do exist to improve that relationship that customers have with organizations. And ultimately, like you said, Faith, those drive business goals of retention and growth. However, as we've seen, that's really a lot easier said than done. Can you share some additional insight to really ensure that future customer experience success?
Absolutely. And I think David said it best when he's like, these successful programs, they must become hardwired into the organization. It has to be embedded back into the day-to-day. Employees actually have to hear the feedback and effectively engage, and then be compelled and empowered to do something about changing the relationship. And I often use the field of dreams analogy. Just because you build it doesn't mean people will come. Just because you build a dashboard or report, you have to help them see the why. You have to connect to them, going back to the easy, appealing, relevant, and specific to the work that they do aspect of things. And that's how you can get it, embedded. It has to be more consistent. It can't be monthly or quarterly. It has to be a regular part of the conversation. And if you can make it a regular part of the conversation, it'll be easier. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it will become a little bit easier. So when you think about some of the benefits experienced by investing in, the VOC program, it's, there's that customer-centric culture element. There's the, cross-sell and upsell potential. There's the customer retention aspect of things. There's so many different benefits. Employee retention, I've seen that happen, going back to David's comments about, just showing your employees, that things matter and that their voice is even being heard. That makes a difference too. So, I think organizations, they're starting to make some improvements. They're starting to think about things a little bit differently. But again, this comes back to, I think, the lack of that strategy we talked about. You have to be strategic. You have to be very specific about defining different steps for success. You have to show that this is not just a lip service effort. I do sometimes fault some leadership in some organizations for not acting as that mouthpiece and helping their CX and VOC and research teams, be more effective by showing people that it matters. So I think you really need to do a good job of showing that this is not just another, check a box and let's move on. This is about, rallying everybody behind hopefully more than just an NPS score, but the stories behind the customer. Which means, again, going back and doing that assessment, what is and isn't working, what data is meaningful and relevant, who are the strategic partners that you have within your organization? Where are those people that, are willing to get on board? I say that there's 4 key audiences in many organizations. There's 3 that we talk about. And then there's the 4th, which is no matter what you do, they're going to be some of the hardest folks to engage. So don't focus too much energy on them early. Focus where you can get momentum and support. If you can do that, you're going to be successful too. So I think those optimal solutions, optimal programs are those that get you moving in the right direction quickly. That are easy to use, easy to become embedded into the workflows, easy for people to see time to value, easy for people to be productive. Things that are easy to adapt to. Change is hard. I often say that change management is crucial to these programs too, which I probably should have said long ago. You have to, start the change, manage through the change, reinforce the change, continue to communicate all throughout. And I think that, when you're going down this program path, whenever you're implementing a new technology, you have to do all of that as well. And then I think one of the other things that does get in the way, and this is worth noting here too, flexibility matters. If something's not working, just because it's been in place for a really long time, don't keep it going. I hear that all the time. Let's add another survey question. Let's, do another survey, or, well, they just want us to do another one, but we know that the skip rule won't allow it. So how can we do this? So you have to think about looking at those functionality and capability gaps and trying to determine what's going to get you what you need. I talked about a couple of these that you can see here on this graph: ease of use, fast time to productivity, making changes quickly, easy to implement. All these things matter, especially if you're trying to embed something into the business. So I think taking that good hard look and step back to make sure that you have what you need to be successful is another great way to start moving in that right direction.
All right. This has been a great presentation. As we finish up, I'd really like to look to both of you as an executive of an organization and as an analyst who does a lot of research and hard looks at those kinds of organizations, and really get some key recommendations from both of you on how to start taking those steps forward to really put meaningful, active customer experience and voice of the customer programs in place.
Yep, great. No, and I know that David and I can probably talk about this for hours, so we will do our best to keep it simple for the sake of getting some actionable information coming out of today, focusing on that whole topic of actually driving to action. The first thing is you have to have the right metrics in place. At Forrester, we talk about incorporating, interaction, perception, and outcome metrics, and making sure that they're things that people can connect to. And a lot of times, some of the metrics that are being used, maybe people don't see that connection to those metrics. David, would you say that you've seen that as well with many of, in your past life, as well as, at Alchemer?
Yeah, and it's funny that you just talked about metrics in that same way. I think you got to start with adoption metrics and ultimately kind of work your way toward outcome metrics, because if you start seeing that parts of the organization are engaging with what the customer is telling you, even if you're yet to see the needle move in terms of business results, that provides some momentum behind what you're doing. So I totally agree, Faith. I think those metrics are really important. I'd also say I love the last slide you put up and the research you guys did on flexibility. These are not the kind of programs, if you're implementing a new way to manufacture aircraft, right? Building a process design and going through a 2-year implementation is really important. When you're dealing with CX and voice of the customer, it's got to be iterative. And you've got to be able to set a destination and a vision of where you want to be. And you've got to be able to be nimble and flexible and moving your way towards that. So Big, heavy implementations is something we try to avoid. We try to help our customers achieve some success early on and to show those adoption metrics and some of the outcome metrics and continue to expand towards the destination they've defined.
I love that that comparison. If people wait that long, they won't have customers anymore.
Right.
So that's just something to consider. Prioritizing, God, I can't even talk today. Prioritizing that closing the insights to action gap. I think that's absolutely crucial. I mentioned those 4 key steps, listen, interpret, act, and monitor. Stop focusing on, the things that you're doing well and drive towards that action component. What's causing you to not be able to get over the hump, so to speak. And so I think that if organizations are able to do that, that's a huge, stepping stone in the right direction. What do you have to add there, David?
Well, I totally agree. I think prioritization's really important. I think some people try to build kind of the be-all, end-all dashboards that allow you to look at data from every single dimension before they move forward to the next step. And I believe that analytics and analysis and research is critically important, but the end being the embedded system you go design. So you use that insight, that research, that analysis to help you build the embedded system so you can respond to every single customer. It's not the destination. The dashboard isn't the destination. The integrated process becomes the destination.
No, absolutely. And I think that that's a great segue into, another point that's crucial here is, all of this needs to be very systematic, and you need to build off of all of these different capabilities and continue to iterate. I mentioned the analysis paralysis factor earlier. You can't fall victim to that. Otherwise, you're just going to stay stuck in that interpret phase. So there's just this, it goes back to that broader strategy and just being very deliberate and thoughtful about the approach. I mentioned it, Rome wasn't built in a day, and these programs certainly aren't either. So as long as you're progressing, I think just having that open mind and focusing on embedding things and becoming systematic, that will really help move the needle as well. Yeah. And I think tying back to that, it's just important to, set that expectation early, especially if people aren't really sure about how these things are going to work, or if it is perceived as fluff or a one and done activity. So what do you have to say there, David?
Yeah, I think they certainly aren't built in one day. And I think that the customer, if you get back to them and they feel like you've engaged them based on what they told you, that's half the battle. I think people are so worried about the sophistication of how the organization engages that customer. And so therefore they spend a whole bunch of time and the customer feels like their voice goes into the wilderness. If engaging and communicating are done quickly and you're closing that loop quickly, even if you get it partially right, the customer's going to be actually surprised and amazed that someone got back to them. And you'll build a lot of brand equity and loyalty just in that engagement.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I actually did a survey from a company. I won't shame anybody who was involved in this. I will say it wasn't Alchemer. But long story short, I did a survey. I let them have it. Meanwhile, I also pointed them to all of the other data they probably have on me, Faith Adams, the angry customer from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, saying, I've called you countless times. We've told you repeatedly that this is an issue. And I wrote all of this in my survey open text. This was at the end of March, and here we are approaching May. Do you think that feedback loop has been closed? What kind of a message did that send me? I am now on a tirade against this company, and I purposely will not shop at places that partner with this organization, which is starting to make it harder for me to make some purchases. Thankfully, I'm big on shopping small business as well. But tying back to that too, I think when you are closing that loop too, you also have to talk about it internally. You have to let people know that this is something that you are doing. Your employees want to know that the feedback that customers are giving isn't going into a black hole. It helps them perceive you as more of a customer-centric organization. And so I think this is a part of a broader communication plan. You have to be able to socialize these things. It goes back to that monitor piece of the cycle of key activities, and helping people understand what's happening, why it's happening, what are some of the results that are being seen. I think that goes a long way in really helping this get embedded into the organization. But I would say more often than not, if I ask somebody, to tell me about their communication plan, they ask me, what do I mean?
Right.
Or they assume that it means sharing a dashboard and a report. And I'm like, no, not that. Like, let's talk about this a little bit more. So, what would your recommendations be there about broader communication?
Well, I was going to pick up on a point you mentioned earlier, and I think that if customers feel like they're not just providing feedback, but they're engaging the organization, and then providing feedback benefits them as a customer. I always use the example of, imagine checking in a hotel, getting into your room, and you get a survey immediately. And it's not just how is the check-in process, but it basically says, do you remember all your toiletries? Is the room like you'd like it? Are you going to want any meals while you're here? Do you need a meeting room? How do you want to check out? And by filling out the survey, someone actually brings you a hypoallergenic pillow, or somebody reserves a dinner reservation for you, or somebody comes up with a toothpaste and toothbrush because you forgot it at home. And you can ask a couple other questions about the check-in process as well, and whether the person behind the desk engaged you in the way you'd want to. But if you're answering questions that make your service better, you're going to be so all in providing feedback and engaging with that company. So, and that's about communication, Faith. That's about feeling like what I'm doing in responding to what the company is asking me for is making my experience better.
Unlike my example, my experience has been not better. It has been worse by them not doing anything. And I will continue to talk about it. Eventually, I might end up shaming them one of these days.
Yeah.
And I think too, going back to what you were just saying, I think, service is going to change, needs are going to change, the product offering or the experience at, the hotel or service center could be very different, down the road, especially because of everything that's been going on. They might change the way that they go about things. So I think that means that you also have to be flexible and agile and be able to go, you offer something new and different. You need to be able to ask how it's performing. I think a lot of times those questions don't get asked because it's viewed as being too cumbersome to go back and ask them, or to make the change, or does it cost more? There's always concerns, or there's fear because it's something different. Is it going to lead to a data debate? But I do think organizations must be flexible and agile for that reason that you note. I guess you would agree with me.
I do. And I actually think if you ask it in the right way, you can come across as an organization as transparent and humble too. You can say, hey, we're trying this. We'd love your feedback. We want to be able to adjust quickly if it's not going right. A lot of organizations are afraid to kind of say they want to learn. They want to be curious about their customer. They want to engage and be nimble. And I think a lot of that authenticity, brands that have a really authentic brand, have some vulnerability to them and have some humility to them. And I think if you do it in the right way, you can be all those things through CX and VOC kind of programs. So it's such a huge opportunity. And I know, Faith, we both, you and I, from all our conversations over a couple of years, have been frustrated that there's so much more that's possible, and we both want to help people get there faster. So the research really gives all of you a lot of insight into that. I think, Jeannie, that's something we're going to share with all the attendees today. You'll get the full research report that Forrester's put out, and it's really exciting to think about what's possible if we really go at those issues head on.
Especially if I think people are feeling the same challenges, it gives them the ammo to say, hey, we're not alone and it's okay to do things differently.
That's right. Exactly right. Yep.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much to both of you. I mean, this research report is just fascinating and relevant all at the same time. We've got several good questions. So if anyone has any more questions, please submit them via the portal. Let's get started. There's a perception that applicant tracking systems are used to screen out job applicants on the basis of gender, race, and age. Wouldn't applicants be reluctant to complete an experience survey, not knowing who would see it or how it would be used? How do you overcome that? I think I'll start with you on that one, David.
Well, I think you've got to be smart about how you do it. I think when you ask people about their experience through a recruiting process, there's a lot of anonymity that can come across through feedback systems and voice of the employee or potential employee in this situation. And I think if you ask people, how did you view our benefits? Was that a deciding factor in whether you move forward with us or not? How was the manager in terms of your interactions with them? Did they clearly articulate what the role required? Did you feel like you understood what the requirements were? I mean, just things that help you be a better employer and can get beyond some of the things about gender, race, or age. Certainly, those are issues and things that as employers we all struggle to address. We take a lot of pride in the diversity of Alchemer, and we work really hard to bring in the best people. But I don't think that necessarily ties back to exactly the point I was raising, which was how to figure out. Give me an example of our core values, for example, are heart for service, be curious, and find a way. Tell me a story about how you were curious in your last role that can give you a way of screening people that goes way beyond resumes, which are so hard to get through. So that's what I was really giving examples of in that scenario.
That's great, David. Next question I'm going to direct to Faith. Any suggestions on how to make customers feel heard when you have tens or hundreds of thousands of respondents? It's a great question.
Yes. Yes, and this is a rabbit hole that can be a long one to go down to if you're trying to close the loop with everybody. You just got to start somewhere, and I tell companies all the time that you can, if you have a bunch of maybe detractors, or if you have a bunch of very dissatisfied customers and that it's damaging to your overall brand reputation and your customer experience, it's okay to start with one small group. You can also close the loop collectively. So for example, this was an organization that had made some updates to their website, largely prompted by a lot of anger and frustration coming from customers in the forms of thousands and thousands of feedback forms. And so they simply put using they actually used a new onboarding tool to walk people through the experience when they went to the website, saying, you spoke up, we listened, and here are some of the changes that you are going to experience starting today. And so you can close the loop collectively. Sometimes it can be really hard to do it one-to-one. Other organizations have, when they've made, this is a B2B company, they would make a lot of changes. They would socialize it out with a regular cadence to their broader customer base, even going beyond the people who left the less than optimal feedback. So I think it's just starting somewhere, maybe with one segment of customers, or maybe with, a certain group of, feedback givers. But you can also close that loop collectively. It can be really hard if you have 10,000 angry customers or frustrated customers. In a perfect world too, though, you'd be able to start to activate, the people who are leaving positive feedback too. But that comes again from that broader socialization mechanism. I do think one of the things we're going to end up seeing in this space is more of an intersection between customer experience and customer engagement. So where there might be even a higher level of automation coming from when somebody shares their feedback, and then based on some of the changes a company makes, having it essentially notify people, where it's not exactly a person who has to be responsible for closing that loop. So it's, I think, look to, starting small and continuing to grow. Many organizations, 61% of companies are not closing the loop from where I sit when I'm looking at a lot of enterprises. So there's lots of room to go, even starting small.
That's great. The next question we have, and I'd like to get both of your perspectives on this, how do we best use the data from transactional surveys and move that into meaningful and actionable data? Why don't we start with you, David?
Yeah, well, we talked a lot today about how you embed things. And I think if you're really purposeful about the questions you ask and you think about what might come back and how you feed it into parts of the organization that would respond to that customer, you're actually designing the survey with the operational aspect in mind, right? You're not just putting the questions out there, pulling them together, putting them into some sort of analysis or chart, and then trying to determine what to do with it. You're actually starting with the end in mind. You're thinking about how you're going to take whatever you hear back and what you're going to do with it. You can actually role play some of it before you launch a survey. If these are the kind of answers we get, what would we do with it? How would we respond to it? How would we route it? Who would follow up? We route feedback data within Alchemer all over the enterprise, and all sorts of different people follow up depending on what the feedback comes back on. And so we try to think about that ahead of time, and we'll use sometimes an initial survey to help us design and understand the system that needs to be built that responds to that feedback.
I mean, I agree with everything David just said. I think it's just, it's also working within the constraints of your organization too. If something is coming into like a transactional, survey or transactional workflow, sometimes more interaction focused, even being able to look at how things are connected across a series of transactions or journeys or micro journeys, that is also crucial because there's often other players, as David had said, setting up the proper alerting and tracking. But again, I think it's also about the sum of all parts. And even I think that employee piece is crucial because sometimes you can find that something that's not captured in the survey is actually part of the problem. So some of maybe the operational systems behind the scenes, some of the tools that are being used, some of the processes. And so I think that that's another thing to kind of double click to make things even more actionable, looking across that broader ecosystem, not just the transactional surveys and some of the relevant data.
Yeah, and Jeannie, I'll add one other thing. I was raised in my junior days at Anderson Consulting doing business process flow diagrams, right? Boxes and arrows and decision diamonds and all sorts of stuff. What would be super interesting, and this is so tactical in the way I'm describing it, but could become so powerful. If you lay out a business process that starts with taking an order and then manufacturing something and then shipping something and then servicing something, if you lay out that business process flow, we could invent a new Visio symbol, Faith, that has like this loop, right? That you put into your business process flow that means this is a point at which I'm going to reach out to the customer and engage them in the process to understand what they need, that then means that next step I take is responding to what they tell me, right? So lots of people think so internally when they think about process design. Lean Six Sigma teams within organizations are built to think that way. You could have that team be trained on, we really want the voice of the customer to be part of that flow. And that when we're designing these business processes, we're extending our enterprise and pulling our customer into the core business processes that drive the organization. So it's a simple example, but these are the kind of technologies that allow you to extend the enterprise.
Absolutely. It's funny that you bring that up because I went and got my Six Sigma because I got sick of some of my ops folks not respecting CX. This was a number of years ago. And I was working with my colleague in the contact center, Art Scholler, on an upcoming report. And we're like, what happened to all those Six Sigma people in the contact center? It's all about all this process improvement. Work hand in hand together. They're embedded in your PMO or somewhere. So much opportunity. I agree.
So much.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're coming up right on the top of the hour. So before the fine folks at Bright Talk end our webinar, thank you so much to Faith and to David. This has been so insightful and so educational. As David said, everybody will get a copy of the research report. Additionally, you can link to a form where you can download it from the portal as well. So again, everyone have a great day, and thank you so much for your participation, and thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Faith.
Thank you.
All right.